Amazing. Is my mic on now? You can all hear me? Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us here this morning. Absolute pleasure to have you in this session, which is called Empowering Bytes. So the focus will be on the word empowering, because we're trying to find those models that help make sure that the data we put out there into the marketplace is used for our benefit and for social justice, and not for all of the other dark and dubious ways that it might be and is being used at the moment. My name's Helena Laurent. I'm based in Geneva, and in my day job, I'm a consumer rights activist. We're a network of consumer rights organizations all over the world. And although we focus a lot on food and finance and energy, digital safety is one of the biggest issues that our network fights for. And so in my day job, I work with organizations that point out that data is being misused from our smart devices. Organizations like this is Which in the UK. In Brazil, IDEC fights for legislation on privacy. In the US, Consumer Reports builds tools that help you understand where your data is being used. There's this great tool called Permission Slip. So in my day job, I worry about this a lot. And so that I'm sharing with you my bias, so that on this panel, you can challenge me with my biases and we can build together and fact check each other, because that's a bit of a theme at the moment. I'm sort of really excited to understand, well, how do we think in this room we should be building that? But of course, this is live streamed as well. So hello out there in the audience. And I'm asked by the forum staff to, if you're going to share anything, please use a hashtag WEF or hashtag OpenForum25. The way we're going to run this is we're going to hear from amazing experts who can really help us and help me think through this topic. And we'll have about 20 minutes where, and even more if I can get to that, of questions from the audience. So do please take advantage of that, and let's build together. I do want to see, it's a bit dark out there, I can't quite see, but I'd love to see who's in the audience, because I know we have, on the stage with me, we're here in the Swiss Alpine Middle School in Davos, and I know that Amanda, who is here representing on the stage, also has some classmates in the room. Can we hear from them? You're here in the front rows, I think? Hello, way, congratulations. I understand you might be missing a maths class at the moment. Is that right? With apologies to your maths teacher, and thank you for letting these wonderful students be part of the conversation. I think we may also have representatives who are residents of Davos. If you'd like to wave your hands, and if not, and I can't see you, thank you very much for your hospitality this week to everybody coming to the World Economic Forum in Davos. I know it's a bit of a disruption in your magical, beautiful town, and I hope anybody who's coming in from outside Davos visits round the year and during the summer as well, when it's just amazing. So with that, let me introduce those on the panel. To my left, Amanda Graf, student and excellent debater also from the Swiss Alpine Middle School. Please welcome her to the stage. To her left is Bilal Jamoussi. He is the Deputy Director at the International Telecommunications Union, which is a global organization that really thinks about the standards for our digital safety. So welcome. Thank you so much, Bilal. To his left, Lauren Woodman is CEO of DataKind, which is an organization that really thinks about how we use data science to combat global issues or to build better. So thank you very much for joining us. And to her left, Peter Lucas Jones has joined us from pretty much the other side of the world in New Zealand. He is the CEO of Tehiku Media, which is an amazing organization, and we'll hear about how he's built that to empower people. So thank you for joining us. Fantastic. Okay, so I want to sort of do a quick round, because this session, it started out with that point of, how many of us are on the internet now. Of course, 2.4 billion people aren't on the internet, so we need to have a global conversation here. But when we are on the internet, we're spending 6 hours on average. I was seeing stats, you pick up your phone between 50 and 150 times per day. What else do you do that frequently? Maybe I don't want to know that, but it's sort of like how much of our lives, and it's not just there, right? It's smart devices, it's your car, it's when you shop online. When you think about digital safety, it's all around. And this year, I actually persuaded by my family, my kids, I turned grayscale, so I don't actually go on that much. I've gotten far more sort of conscious about geolocation. I'm just, this notion that then our data is then used, sold on, we really don't know how that's used, and the level of scams in particular that we're seeing, the level of inequality that exacerbates, that cements into our society has really it struck me this year. So I don't know, I wonder if on the panel, what have any of you become more aware of how you use your data, and what have you done? Lauren, perhaps can I come to you first?
Sure. Thank you, and thank you all for joining us today. It's one of those topics that I think we could spend lots of time on and don't spend enough time on. I think, like you, I've gotten a lot more sensitive to how my data is used, and that's a conversation that I think if you had asked me 5 or 6 years ago, I probably wouldn't have had the same reaction. I think I'm very conscious now of, rejecting all cookies, rejecting third-party cookies, routinely clear those things out. I got on a bit of a kick last year and wrote letters to many companies saying, you no longer have the right to use my data, please strip my data out. Because I got really frustrated with a bunch of phone calls I was getting to, tile my bathroom or something. But it came from an online inquiry form, and I got on a bit of a kick about it. I think part of that has also been watching my teenagers. I have teenage children. Watching them really be very sensitive around how their data is used and how their friends use their data. And that, I think, has spurred a bit of a conversation. And I think a lot of us are coming to that realization that it's very personal. We all make different choices. There are good sides and bad sides to data usage, but really learning to balance that and knowing enough to make those choices personally, I think, is really important.
Yeah. And when you then link your own use of data to what's happening in the world, what are the trends or the dangers or the groups that perhaps you feel, well, this is why it's so important that I care?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, I've spent a lot of time thinking about is this question of data equity. And not, I think we've all been part of the conversation that a lot of the underlying data that is being used to train large language models is not representative of the global community. It's not really even representative of the internet using community, much less the global community. And, thinking about that and thinking about how do we take steps so that the right data is used in order to get the right outcomes becomes really important. And I just, from a personal level, I want to see us up-level the way that we think about data usage and the equity questions, and not only in the data that's used to train models and the data that's used to make decisions, but also how those outcomes are applied equitably across the board.
Perfect, thank you. Anybody else on the panel, would you like to talk about how you think about your data and protect your data and how it's used? Peter Lucas.
I like to think about it, first of all, by depersonalizing it and recognizing that as a person, I'm a member of a whānau or a family. And as a collection of families, we are members in Aotearoa of sub-tribes or hapu. Those hapu or sub-tribes form part of larger tribes. And collectively, data belongs to us rather than we owning that data. So the way we look at things, I think, is really important, because modernizing our perspective of data usage, data collection, and of course data governance means that we have to recognize that being modern does not necessarily mean being Western. So when we start to think about including others, including everyone, sometimes it means that we have to open up our mind. And so what I've found in the work that I do, teaching computers how to speak Māori, an Indigenous language, is it's a way of unlocking culture. It's a way of unlocking traditional knowledge. and applying those principles, values, concepts, and those types of things to the way that we make decisions, but also the way that we develop resilience strategies and provide new and meaningful ways of looking at the world. So when I think about how our data is being collected without our permission, I think it's something that can be akin to the privatization of land. And when Indigenous peoples were colonized, for example, in Aotearoa, we saw many of our people become landless. And if we do not take on board those lessons of the past, it'll be difficult to understand fully what the digital world could hold for us. I see there's an opportunity to bridge the gap between those that have and those that have not. But for us to do that and be part of a cooperative approach to making things better, I think it's important that we understand and learn that there needs to be greater boundaries. There needs to be greater perspective on what the policy nationally and internationally around gathering data without people's consent means now and into the future. Do we opt in, or do we give people the option to opt out immediately? Kia ora.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Amanda, coming to you, how do you think about your data? Do you and your classmates think the approach to how our information is used or owned, or the thinking, is that evolving?
Well, I think me myself could be much more cautious with my data. I think there is a big problem with the education to it, because we don't really get taught what it means with our data online. And when we accept a cookie, what that really means. We just do it because we're used to it. But I think if people would educate us more and our generation, I think there could be a lot of problems and risk online be avoided with it.
Brilliant, thank you. And Bilal, are you seeing that, folks? Well, I want you to share, everybody is sharing their own sort of personal story here as well. But I mean, I'd love to hear how you respond.
Well, I want to pick up on what Amanda is saying. It's really a spectrum.
Yeah.
On one hand, you can completely be out of the virtual world and not be connected to any social media or any of your data being available on the internet, or to not have any gatekeeping in terms of what data you're willing to share and what transparency mechanisms that exist in sharing your data. So in that spectrum, from completely being open to completely locked out, you need to find that sweet spot, which is based on knowledge and awareness and transparency in how your data is going to be used. So awareness of the user is a critical part of this conversation.
If we could go back to the audience, how many of you, I won't ask specific sort of ways of doing things, but how many of you do you think you have become more aware perhaps in the last year and taken action to, do something differently about how your data is used? Would you raise your hand if you think your attitudes have changed? Yeah, that's quite a lot of the audience. If you have any tips and tricks and things that you think you can be doing, and how you get your voice out there to make change happen and call for change, we'd love to hear those. Okay, so let's dig into some of the stories and dig into sort of some of how this works. Amanda, I want to come back to you and sort of, as you think about, all right, you've already touched on there needs to be greater awareness. What would you like to see built? What is your vision of a world with better digital safety and better social justice? What might that look like?
I think we should be taught, especially in school, now what are the risks being online and on media or on social media. And I think there should also be a better communication between the users and the authorities of different kinds of media and apps, and that they can be helped better with their issues. And yeah, I think really the key to a better online and media security is education within our generation, but also older generations. Just like overall, people should be more aware what they are doing when they are online.
Okay, so it's about awareness and then that representation into the system as well. Yeah, no, that's crucial. Peter Lucas, can I come to you? I'm fascinated by the way in which you've built an entirely new approach that sort of fits in with the values and the view of how things can be better that you described earlier. Can you tell us a bit of the story of Te Hiku, how that built up, and teach us more about what happened?
Originally, we were an iwi radio station, a tribal radio station. We're one of 21 in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We were born out of a response to the systemic language discrimination that Te Reo Māori experienced, and the harm that had intergenerationally for transmission of the language. And of course, language and culture are they're so connected. With the decline of language, so too came the decline of culture. Our station was a response to that. We wanted to hear our news, our current affairs, listen to Māori music, hear Māori voices. And so that became our data pipeline. After 30 years of growing trust in the community, we wanted to document and transcribe our archives, 30 years of native speaker, idiomatic expression, colloquialisms, the cornerstone of Indigenous knowledge. And when we embarked on that journey, we realized quickly that we could not transcribe the information that we had collected, not quickly. And so we decided to teach computers how to speak our language. Our technology operates at a 92% accuracy rate. And with our philosophy of do no harm, for us, we always strive to do better. But 92% accuracy rate for our speech to text technology has been part of our journey. We've now embarked on developing speech synthesis and bilingual, because the speakers of our language are bilingual, they're code switchers. But we also recognize that when we save a language, we're contributing to saving the planet. When a language dies, it's like someone said, I can't think of their name, but it's like a national library is just burnt to the ground. But the world has taught us to be deaf to that. And so that has been our journey, because we understand that climate change and resilience requires us to understand the stories of the past. And so the observations that our ancestors have recorded in our language over hundreds, if not thousands of years, are things that we want to harness and share with the world, so that when we think about the Pacific and its place in the climate conversation, we are not forgotten, but together we remember.
Yeah, and what I loved, there were so many amazing things about how you've built this. One of them, as I was reading, was as you take the next step and start working with organizations to help you scale up or help you do this, you have looked at the licensing agreements that ensures that then that value is not stripped out, that value comes back, and that the people who are contributing that language continue to not own, but continue to have a fair benefit from it. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach that? Because that's going up against some big giants out there.
That's correct. And I think for us, it's very much been about accuracy and precision. It's been about ensuring that benefit comes back to the community, that the language belongs to, that the knowledge belongs to. And whilst we want to share, we also want to find ways to develop capability, to develop capacity, to grow talent. And that requires us to be innovative in our approach to data governance. Our philosophy, our way, and our belief is that Māori data must be subject to Māori governance, Māori data governance, which is very similar to the way that other Indigenous people view data. And one of those things is DNA. One of those things is our knowledge of bird migration. One of those things is our understanding about how animals move in the world. Our knowledge of the stars, the way that our people traveled throughout the Pacific, navigating by the stars, wayfinding. That story connects the other languages in our language group. What we have achieved for Te Reo Māori in terms of scaling would provide a backbone for other Indigenous languages in the Pacific to benefit. They too could benefit from what we've created targeted, realistically, that would be an opportunity for those language groups, which are minority languages that have the keys to their culture, but collectively we're part of a bigger culture. Our methodology and the way in which we have developed our data license is about guardianship. It's about protecting not just our past, but our present and our future through applying kaitiakitanga, rangatiratanga, whakapapa, those concepts that are ingrained in our society as Māori people and the way that we make decisions. And so it's less about who we are as individuals and more about the people that we belong to. So it's less about the individual and more about the community. It's less about our rights as individuals and more about our responsibilities to those that we come from and those that we share whakapapa with. And one of the proverbs that we have that guides us is e hoki whakamuri kia anga whakamua. Look to the past and forge your path into the future.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Can I ask, I know you've been approached by a number of groups from around the world asking, well, how would we do the same? I mean, when I looked, you started in the 1990s. There's a vast amount of technical expertise and knowledge, and there are a lot of factors. Could that be done though? Could you see, well, anybody, any community, what would be the factors be that would enable a community to take the same approach?
Understanding fully and committing to understand more the data that we use as data scientists. Many data scientists do not understand the data that they are using to create models, whether that's machine learning, artificial intelligence, whatever we want to call it. But when we recognize the profound ability of community members to understand their own language data, their own cultural data, and interpret that and tag and label the phonetic features of the language that belongs to their culture, we recognize an ability to grow talent within our community. And I think ensuring that we balance the way that we value people, not just those that have had professional training and an education that only money can buy, but those that have experienced life and understand the data from that perspective too.
Amanda, you got it exactly right, and we should all march upstairs and start that maths class right now, really. Yeah, so there we go. Thank you. Lauren, you started out sort of sharing how you have put your own voice out there. You've shared this sort of concept of data equity. Talk more about how would we build that, and what are the examples you can see perhaps which are emerging where that practice is, where that is being put into practice?
Yeah, I mean, this is a beautiful story for lots of different reasons. But one of the things that strikes me is, part of being digitally safe is having an environment in which, we can use these tools. I mean, technology is just a tool, but we can use these tools, to accomplish what it is that our own respective personal goals may be. And it could be studying for a maths class, it could be buying presents for the holidays, it could be learning something new, it could be any number of different things. But that environment, the internet that we want, the online experience that we want, really has to speak to the communities that comprise the internet, which is all of us. And if we don't have those voices, that really creates a scenario. I mean, I thought your comment that being modern doesn't mean being Western, like I literally wrote it down. I was like, that encapsulates all of it. What is the technology world that we are trying to create in which we feel safe and secure to realize our own potential? We can only do that if that world represents who we are, and that means including those voices. It means including data that represents all of us in the models that we are building. It means that building in that community knowledge is really important. And there's, in my role, I've heard lots of these stories over the years, but we were speaking briefly yesterday, it is important not to lose those local voices. And it's important not to lose that local knowledge, because we end up making decisions that are bad decisions if we don't do so. And a colleague of mine that I've worked with over the last couple of years was telling me this wonderful story about maybe terrible story, about some work that had been done in Kenya to fight desertification. And so the government had, done some research in what trees grow well here. And so they had come into communities and shared seeds, and trees had been planted and all of that kind of stuff. And everybody thought, yay, we're making progress against desertification and reclaiming land, only to come back a couple of years later to find out they had all been dug up and thrown away, and no one was doing this anymore. Because what local farmers knew was those trees in particular sucked a lot of water out of the water table. And so the cash crops that those communities depended on couldn't grow and didn't grow. And so everybody said, okay, well, we know what the problem is. Let's go fix that. It's that kind of data exchange, that kind of local knowledge, that kind of local representation that becomes really critical, especially when decisions are being made by algorithms or in automated systems or in ways where we may not have direct personal agency. When decisions start getting made on behalf of all of us by systems, you want to make darn sure that the data about your community and that local knowledge and your representation is part of that equation.
It feels, Bilal, I'm coming to you, it feels like decisions are being made, especially this week, on our behalf without necessarily our involvement. It doesn't feel like a very sort of good trajectory that we're on in terms of actual representation and care and safety. Where are the points of hope, perhaps, in the system?
Yes, I think the points of hope is that we have an international framework in which we operate. So the ITU is the UN digital agency, specialized agency for digital technologies, and cybersecurity is not a new topic. It just evolves with new technologies. And the ITU, for example, has a number of frameworks that help countries develop and improve in their cybersecurity posture and data protection posture. For instance, we issued the Global Cybersecurity Index. We issued one revision last year where all the member states, the 194 countries in the ITU, report on various aspects of data protection, of cybersecurity, whether there is a national cybersecurity strategy, if there is legislation in the country, if there is capacity building, data protection, computer incidents, response team, all of the tools that are necessary to protect the country's cybersecurity space. And what we realized, and the last time we issued this cybersecurity index was in 2001. And what we have seen in the last 3 years is quite an improvement in a number of countries, especially in Africa. There is a lot more awareness. There is a lot more actions in terms of having more cybersecurity strategies in the country. But what we saw, which is quite interesting, is a big gap between the legislation and the strategy and the capacity to implement. Because you need cybersecurity engineers, you need awareness at the user level, especially the more vulnerable communities, whether it's children that have not yet grasped the dangers of opening up everything, or the elderly that may not have the literacy to be online. And so that cybersecurity index work that we do with all the countries raises the awareness at the national level. And another pillar that helps countries implement cybersecurity are the standards. And the ITU issues a number of standards which are actually developed by the private sector and the governments hand in hand, which is the only standards organization. ITU is the only standards organization that has 194 member states, and it's the only UN agency that has 1,000 private sector entities and 200 universities and research institutes. So the outcome of the conversation and the guidelines and the standards are really a multi-stakeholder approach and fully representative. And from those standards, we can then implement child online protection. We have personal identifiable information standards, PII. And with those standards, then governments have the tools to implement the cybersecurity legislation, the cybersecurity agenda and strategy. So by putting all those pieces together, that's how we can help navigate the what I call the sword and shield, because you protect and then there is new technology that comes up and you have to come up with new protection. Today we talk about quantum computers and the fact that they can break the usual hash function back to your math class, to encrypt the traffic on the network. We look at AI as a new tool that could either help in cybersecurity or could be a threat in cybersecurity. So we need to continue that dialogue. It cannot be governments alone. It cannot be the private sector alone. That continuous multi-stakeholder dialogue is the one that helps us keep the framework safe and raise the awareness and ensure that the consumer is aware of what their data is going to be used for. If their connection is not secure, what are the dangers of not being secure? One example of a standard that has been around for 30 years and has been evolving is the public key infrastructure, which is the standard that encrypts the traffic on the internet. And that keeps evolving as new threats come up and new solutions are provided.
Okay, there's more we could talk about on that because I'm sort of horrified by the growth in scams. So, yeah. We can see how that. But we have got to the time where I really want to hear from the audience. Is there anybody who would like to pose a question? Would you please raise your hand? And we can take 3 or so at a time. So I have one here. I have one at the back. And one just there. Would you please stand up and ask your question? If you can keep it quite brief, so then we can hear from 3. Yeah, this gentleman there with the blue lanyard, and I think or whoever is closest to the mic. Go for it.
Thanks, and I appreciate your discussion is great. And I am Kuniohara from Japan. I have a question for you. And in Japan, children's dependence on smartphone is a problem. What kind of plan is there in the AI era and in life? I'd like to hear your opinion. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Let's take there was somebody with their hand up in the middle there. Yes, the lady, yes, in the middle.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. I'm an immersive technology specialist working for the UK government, and my interest is what your thoughts are on the collection of people's biometric data off of VR and AR kind of devices, and also your thoughts on the fact that law enforcement worldwide really has no idea about what this stuff does, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, lack of awareness all round. And the gentleman standing at the back, I believe, yes. Perfect, thank you.
Hi, so loud mic. Hi guys, my name is Hugh, I'm from Canada, and I just have a question on just the, on more of the spectrum of course this is more focused on the overall thematic is empowerment bytes, but we've been talking about digital safety, so I wanted to pose the question to how do you find the balance of properly engaging digital safety and incorporating those methods, but also being able to have a accessible network and a proper system towards developing nations. And is that different based on cultural backgrounds or contextualization, and how do you kind of approach those? Or are we dedicated in pursuing a more refined, universal standard on digital safety, or is it changing based on nation to nation or country to country or city to city? Thank you.
Awesome. Right, we could continue for the rest of the day on some of these. Let's pick up, Australia is considering banning the use of smartphones for people under 16. So let's start with that point about child safety, and especially given the oncoming AI. Is there anybody who would like to address that? Bilal? Yeah, please.
Yep. Thank you for the question on the child safety. I mean, it includes the hours that kids spend on the phone. It impacts the hearing. With the WHO, we published the standards on safe listening, and many of the phone manufacturers are implementing that to reduce the volume and the duration. We just started some work on safe viewing, because with 6 hours, like looking in the same direction, there are impacts on the eyes and the. But also in terms of being less on the phone. That is a real problem, not only in Japan. I think we see it across the globe. And I think that's where more the schools and the younger settings of education is an opportunity to raise the awareness. I don't think banning digital equipment is would work. I think we talk about new generation, digital connected generation. So there is more education, more awareness to the kids to know what dangers they put themselves into when they spend so much time, whether it's to their hearing, to their eyesight, to their socializing, and having more real connections other than the virtual connections.
Yeah, please.
What we've noticed in Aotearoa, particularly with the members of our own tribe, Te Aupōuri, we have a very young population. The average age of one of our people is 21. But we've also noticed that many of our infants are exposed to devices as young as 4 months old. And also the type of content that children are exposed to, the content created may not actually be the sort of content you would want your children to be exposed to. So I think when we take that on board, we need to understand a range of different concerns and the development of the brain, for example. How is that affected by continual screen time when we don't really understand what the impact of that is in child development? So I think there's a lot of questions, and that there is perhaps a need to be more cooperative in the way that we address that, not only regionally, but internationally.
And perhaps the biometrics question, Amanda, banning, no banning? You'd be okay if smartphones were banned for a certain age younger than you? What do you think? Would that work?
I think smartphones can open a big, also a big variation for many benefits. For example, AI, we can use that to study, for example, or it's really helpful in the daily life. So I think completely banning it with only the age of 16 is a bit over, it's a bit too much. I would say maybe until the age of 10 would be appropriate, because I think from then on you can really be cautious, and if people would educate the youngers, then it would even be better, because that would just mean that people are more cautious and can use the digital world as a benefit.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, new legislation coming for the graph agenda. I like it. Biometrics, briefly, and I know that the team is like, Helena, you're totally over time, but I think this is a great question. How would you approach use of biometric data in this?
Go ahead.
So we had a focus group on metaverse in the ITU that brought, it was an open platform for every participant, and came up with a number of reports and guidelines on the use of AR, VR, XR. And I would invite you to look at, just search for the ITU focus group on the metaverse. We have a number of reports that guide on the use of biometrics in the virtual space. 2024, we held the first UN Virtual Day, and we have the second one in June in Torino, Italy. That's the way that we approach it, is by having a conversation that is multi-stakeholder on the benefits of AR and VR and virtual reality and metaverse, but also on the challenges and how to address them.
Just quickly, I'd like to just mention that in Aotearoa, New Zealand, for example, Māori people are very much incarcerated. And when we look around the world, that story is shared by other Indigenous peoples that have experienced colonization as well. Biometric data that is gathered without consent and then used inappropriately is a growing concern, particularly where law and order and decisions around people's future is being made. So likewise, when we think about children, I think we need to think about their parents as well, because when parents are incarcerated, they don't have caregivers, and they often find themselves into places of the state. And so I think we really need to take a well-rounded approach when we think about how this type of data informs decision making and the people it impacts on.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, I would, to speak to the question about, sort of the range of options that we have. This biometric question, I think, sort of fits into that a bit, which is there are very appropriate times to use biometric data for very legitimate reasons. I'm not sure that it being collected without consent, because I'm playing a video game, is the right level of consent. And I think we have to have a much more sophisticated conversation around what kind of data, for what kind of usage, with what kind of consent, with what kind of agency. And we cannot assume that a single approach works for all data. It will not work for all environments in which that data might potentially be used. Even if it's appropriate today, it may not be appropriate tomorrow as technology changes, and we have to think about how do we remedy those situations where data is being used for purposes for which it was not collected, intents for which it was not collected. And that is a much more sophisticated conversation. To Amanda's point about education, I think a lot of us came into the technology age thinking, my data's not that important. What would anybody want to know about me? You start to break that apart, and all of a sudden that becomes, a real question. There are questions around appropriate use, appropriate scenario for what time period. And the one thing I would say is all of us have to lean into this conversation a lot more aggressively, because governments have frameworks, but they don't actually know and can't know all of the different use cases in which inventors and innovators are coming up with ways to use data. All of us as consumers can't know all of those different ways, and those voices have to come forward, because if it's technology that we want, and if it's technology that we want to use to benefit us, we have to be part of that conversation. And that's going to mean that we all have to engage and understand how data is being used and what agency we maintain over it.
What would you want anybody in this room or listening to express that, to create their form of representation in that system?
I think that's a great question, and I think we don't have great methodologies to do that. That having been said, local communities are a great place to start. I think consumer organizations with which you are particularly involved are important. I think parents groups are important. I think talking to your local legislators are important. I think voting with your dollars are important. I think opting out when you don't want your data to be used, or when you read the user agreement, you don't understand how that data is being used, you can't figure it out, opt out. It is actually not required for you to opt in. Sometimes it is. Maybe you don't need it. Maybe you do. But I think people have to vote with the methodologies that they have, and they have to talk to their local policymakers and those that bring us all together and have those conversations. If you want, my children will tell you that my favorite phrase, and they hate it, is to be a participant in your own rescue. If you don't like what's happening with your data, then we've got to figure out a way to shift that conversation. And it will not happen overnight. It won't happen just because one of us opts out. But when people really start asking hard questions and start wanting to know answers, the incentives that we need to put in place need to be different than they are right now. And until we start asking questions and voting with the way that we use technology, that conversation is going to stay out of our own hands.
Bilal, how many of the standards actually incorporate, or ways in which countries are addressing this, incorporate that representation and engaging people's voice so that you can understand how is this actually working?
I would say all of them, because the way we approached AI and data is by launching the AI for Good platform in 2017, way before ChatGPT and generative AI became fashion. And the idea was to have a multi-stakeholder dialogue on AI and data. This year, we'll have our AI for Good in Geneva, 8 to 11 July. Please mark your calendar and come. And from there, we spawn a number of activities, including robotics competitions for youth. So in the robotics, there is a lot of AI, and that exposes the children in the schools to the importance of data science, of what data could be used for. We created a number of focus groups looking at different AI applications for health, for natural disaster management, for agriculture. So this multi-stakeholder dialogue in the AI for Good Summit is a great way to continue the conversation that Lauren hinted that is an ongoing process that we need to maintain.
Okay. Do I have time to go for another round of questions?
Until 1:45.
1:45. Excellent. All right, we've been given more time, guys. All right, let's go for another round of questions. Lady in the front here. Two ladies in the center there, I can see with their hand up. Anyone? And gentleman to the right at the back, please.
Hi, my name's Marvi Memon. I'm a former social protection minister from Pakistan, but in my current role here, I'm the president of LAWEP, which is the first generative AI model legislative firm. My question really is, do you believe that moving from policy reforms to legislative reforms and legislation is actually useful, especially since we at LAWEP are designing from policy to legislation, keeping 200 UN countries in mind, model legislation to do with online harassment in this particular case. This is one of the examples that we're doing, but we could be doing anything. But again, I bring it back to, do you think it's useful policy shift to legislative cementing? Because I've seen very little of that. Not just because I'm a former parliamentarian, but just in my field of work. People, are they thinking enough in those terms?
Okay, thank you. Let's bring the mic into the centre here. Lady with the brown sweater first, I think.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Kiran. I'm here with TikTok. I'm a clinician and a creator. And it was a question about the digital literacy, and my view is that it's kind of 5 prongs to this. The first one is parents knowing how to help children and support them in their digital use, and I think technology's advanced at a faster rate than parenting programs have, and parents don't get a manual for, how much time should they be allowed, how much access should they be allowed, but they need to have it because that's the world that we now live in. Parents then need to know how to teach those skills. Professionals like myself need to then help parents that then struggle or children that get addicted to tech. And then platforms have a responsibility to make the online world safe for the children and reduce harm, and the legislation, and then also, the wider, education of people. And I think often, so my question is, do you think that it's not just one thing, it is kind of a range of those things that all need to be looked at for digital well-being to be what we want it to be? And later on this week, I'm on a panel with the World Health Organization to talk a bit more about this. But yeah, that was the question, that it's not just the responsibility of one organisation, is it a shared thing?
Okay.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And gentleman over to the right here, or my right. Oh, sorry, I thought you were... Please.
Hello, good morning. Hello, I'm Celine. I'm from the Philippines, also with TikTok. I'm a creator. My work focuses on biodiversity, and I understand and know that data science, AI, and machine learning has such incredible impact on biodiversity monitoring, illegal wildlife trade, and forest protection. But now we're also seeing and learning its negative environmental impact. My question is, what are your thoughts on these? How do we reconcile this, and what do we do about it? Thank you.
Great question. And over to the right here.
Hi, good morning. My name is Anirban. I'm a scientist and a drug developer. So my question is rather, a comment/question, a rather provocative one. There's this momentum that's gained a lot of traction about, or rather against, collection and sharing of personal data. I sometimes wonder whether when a momentum picks up, sometimes it has the tendency to just go ahead and pick more momentum, right? And I wonder if that's happening with this topic. Remember that a lot of the biggest technological developments that are impacting society in a positive way and will continue to do that. And I'm talking about, for example, generative AI, which is based on machine learning, would not have happened if there was no sharing of personal data, right? Facial recognition, digital recognition, all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot more going on. I'm not a specialist in that technology. Remember that sharing of personal data also leads to a lot of business activity, a lot of gainful employment, right? So is it, are we not sometimes taking an extreme position about, stopping all kinds of sharing of and collection of personal data? Should it not be a more moderated, a more considered approach to the problem rather than a, black and white approach? So I know there's no right answer or wrong answer to this, but just want to, throw it out in the open and get some opinions, comments. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Let's take those 4 areas. So we have, are we in a hype cycle about privacy? My answer would be we're nowhere near that yet. We need to be talking far more about the day you go down the promenade and there's privacy on every storefront rather than AI, that would be interesting. But that would be my provocative response back. But let's say, are we in a hype cycle where we're just sort of caught up in conversation about data and we're not really digging into how we can approach this? The environmental impact of all of this, which is obviously crucial. The range of where does responsibility fully lie? I'm going to throw in I think way too much responsibility for everything is being thrown back on us as an individual. We are expected to be aware about everything right now, from how to read a label to how to turn off geolocation. We're going through massive change. But anyway, biased, get off my soapbox, back to the panel, and the way in which policy versus legislation. All right, maybe, Amanda, I'm going to come to you a little bit about, is the environmental impact to all of this? Do you bring together your digital life and concerns about climate? Do those 2 things come together, or are they sort of separate for you? How do you bring those?
I think I'm aware what my digital foot is doing with the environment.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think I just have not enough knowledge to really try to combine those 2 things together, because we're not really taught, or I'm not really taught, how to look at my also environmental footstep is really combined with my digital use, really.
Got it. So when you look at AI, are you conscious about the environmental implications of that, or?
Not really.
Okay.
I wouldn't say I'm really conscious of anything like that.
Okay. How do we approach? Where should we start? Do you have any preferences, or should we guide?
So I'll jump in on the environmental question, just because I think, and to the other point, that there are benefits from technology and there are risks from technology. I think one of the places that we do see industry really leaning in is, how do you use AI to actually lower the energy demands of the technology that we're using? And we've seen huge gains in that. That I think is actually a really promising place where AI and machine learning will help us better manage the environmental impact. The other thing I think we see technology companies, I can ask ChatGPT, give me 3 restaurants to eat in tonight, or I could just go search. And the environmental impact of both of those things is markedly different. It's also markedly different in terms of the overhead for companies that are doing both of those things. And so you start to see companies sort of parsing that out, which is, I can answer this with search. I don't need generative AI to do this. I can provide a good answer to the consumer. So I think you'll see companies leaning into that place as well, into that differentiation as well from a platform's perspective. That having been said, I do think that we have to pay attention to the environmental impact, and systems designs are starting to pay attention to that, because those are not just environmental costs, but they're also cost to companies for the use of AI, and that is going to drive a lot, I think, of a lot of behavior that will have a more positive impact than if we went into Gen AI wholeheartedly.
Very good. Please.
I think the question around policy versus legislation is a really important question, because it raises to my attention the need to better understand the changing public mood. And when the mood of the public starts to change, I think that will inform an expectation of government to look at what legislation should and could and maybe will be, particularly when we think about how governments want to use generative AI to make decisions, strategic decisions they're responsible and voted in, elected to make. Because when that starts happening, the public want to know who's being employed to make these decisions. I'd imagine that as a member of the public. And so I think that it's very important that we understand policy and the place of legislation when we see an uptake of generative AI in decision making. The question about data sharing, I think, is very important as well. And the key there for me is the word sharing. Sharing is a decision. So whether something's being harvested or where it's being shared are two very different things. And information that's harvested without consent is being used for a specific purpose, of course, but it's also being harvested without consent, without someone's knowledge. And I'm not saying that we can turn back time, but it's good to know where that information has come from. That's not always readily available. But I think it's important for us to understand consent. And when we think about privacy, it's also good to think about authorship. And if we think about content, we're thinking, who's making this content? Where's this content derived from? When we think about biodiversity, that's something that I'm particularly interested in as a Maori person from Te Aupōuri. What we understand in terms of our language is that we've named every rock, we've named every river, we know every plant, the animals, all of that stuff is so closely connected with our culture and our language. Taking that on board when we look at the environmental impact of AI, and we look at the need to address community needs, perhaps we could cooperatively take a new approach. When we think that there are communities that still exist in the Pacific and in places that, are without electricity, is there an opportunity for us to harness traditional knowledge around where sunbelts are? Solar energy, understanding where geothermal energy is an opportunity. Where does energy cost less to make or create or develop? And how can we have data centers or data infrastructure, data facilities that not only address the need to have generative AI or data storage or data centers and those sorts of things, but address problems hand in hand with those places that data comes from or originates from. So those are things that I think could be developed in partnership with communities. They're things that we could address together through perhaps having a network of smaller data centers that contribute to the well-being, the digital well-being, the physical well-being, and also the community that those people live in. Kia ora.
Yes. I think it's important to try to demystify AI. So AI is basically two things. There is the data, and there is the algorithms or the machine learning that operates on the data in a massive way. And there are all kinds of data. There is personal data, which is a minuscule amount of the data that's out there. There is a lot of industrial data. There is a lot of sector-specific data. And harvesting that data is tremendous because that's the focus of using AI for good or data for good. When you have thousands of radiology scans and you sift through them in an anonymous way, then the healthcare sector could be augmented in being able to detect diseases that only AI could see. A radiologist would not be able to see with the naked eye. That's AI for good. That's data for good. If you look at the data of the agriculture, having drones, taking pictures, having Internet of Things sensors in the ground to tell you whether the ground is wet enough or not, all of that data being harvested would allow us to produce more crop, which is good. If you look at the satellite imaging and being able to detect natural hazard that's coming, whether it's a fire, a landslide, water, flooding, and so on, that's data for good. That's another AI for good approach. And there is the personal data. And in the personal data, as I said at the beginning, it's a spectrum. It's where you're comfortable, because the more data you give, the more services you're going to get. And you need to be conscious that there is a transaction there. Mm-hmm. You're selling something. You're not maybe paying money to get a service, but you're giving your data to get a service. And everybody has a different threshold of acceptance of how much data they are willing to give on a personal note and how much services they're going to get. But you need to know that those free services are not really free. Okay? And then to the question on the environment, certainly data centers are consuming more and more power. And when you do generative AI searches and queries, they're quite intense in energy use. What we are doing in the ITU is we have a number of standards that measure how much electricity is used for all the information and communication technologies, from networks to wireless networks to data centers and so on. So the first thing that's important is to be able to measure the footprint in the same way. And to be cognizant that there is two sides of the coin. One is, yes, data centers and AI is going to use a lot of power to produce results. But at the same time, when you look at all of those AI for good applications, for instance, in Switzerland, Swisscom produced a lot of data on mobile phone presence around bus routes in the morning. And that data was used anonymously to optimize the bus routes. So when you optimize the bus route, you're using less fuel. And that's good. So we need to have a more educated discussion on the good and the bad. Certainly there is more use of electricity for the data center, but you have a lot of AI applications that reduce energy use in other sectors. And in the ITU, we published a report, and I invite you to look at it, AI and the environment, just a few months ago, that looks at both sides of the coin and stresses the importance of having international standards to keep everyone at the same benchmark and at the same measure. Just to close on this, being in a high school and having students and teachers, I think all of us owe it to the teaching community to be up to speed on data, on AI, on cybersecurity, even just at a level of framework, to know, like there are so many tools of generative AI. There is ChatGPT, there is Google Gemini, there is Meta Llama, there is all kinds of stuff. One basic is to have a table to see what's the application of each tool, how much electricity it might be using. Like to your point, a search versus ChatGPT query. Having that knowledge with teachers and students will educate how much energy you're using, to your point on your digital footprint. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I check those who've asked questions, because we're coming to a close at this point. If you've asked a question, do you feel that's been appropriately touched on and responded to as best as possible? Thank you. We've got a thumbs up there. Thank you very much. Okay. Recognise there are a range of approaches we need here. There is hope. There is also, we need to be aware of the potential risks, and that's both a personal responsibility, it's a personal right, and it's a global responsibility and right, and everywhere in between. This is the joy and the beauty of systems, right? Are there any final questions? They're going to have to be super, super brief. Oh, we do have one here. Okay, to you. All right, a brief question, and then we'll wrap up. And I'm going to ask each of our panelists their predictions and hope for 2025, the key thing that you'd like to see happen.
Yeah, hi, I'm Charu Tripathi. I'm from Zurich. I head a startup which provides marketing technology solutions and services to companies. Very insightful sessions. Thank you so much. Just wanted to understand, and taking cue from Anirban's question, that sometimes data is good, bad. We are talking about it, pros and cons. There are marketing technology tools which helps companies for data protection, and which actually avoids the slip of data, and we can see there are so many online frauds. So are the companies not using them efficiently and effectively? That was just my question. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Are businesses stepping up in the appropriate way to protect people from fraud and from the worst cases? Where do we see that happening?
Some businesses are, because they are conscious of their reputation as being in the stock market, and they're conscious of their social responsibility. Some others may not, to the extent that they should. And I think that's where policy and legislation comes into play, with certain standards that need to be implemented to uphold those policies.
Okay.
Plus one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that, I totally agree. And if trust is diminished in that relationship between the business owner and the people that they're serving, so too with their business. So I think that's an evolving conversation.
Okay. Well, it's a hopeful response in a week where we've had folks stepping back from fact-checking and, raising questions about their responsibilities. Okay. No comment.
Well, that's a totally another. I think that's a totally different conversation.
Okay.
And it raises to our awareness the concerns that people are having, but again, it also raises to our awareness the jurisdiction that we have over those decisions to fact check or not fact check as well, which are pretty much minuscule at the moment.
Yeah. For me, that concept of digital safety is a surround sound. Safety, our way of understanding safety, there's almost a sort of, we silo. Well, that's about content. This is about fraud. For the average person in the street, if any of us are average, you know, it's whether I feel safe or not, and have I got enough time.
And is fake or fraud different?
Yeah.
Did you get faked or did you get fraud?
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
what I mean? Like,
exactly.
I mean, like it's an interesting question.
On the fake or fraud, we launched last May a collaboration on multimedia authenticity, because you can create fake text, you can create fake images, you can create fake videos, but there are also standards and techniques that allow you to watermark and have AI to actually tell you whether the video or audio is a fake or authentic. So with the international standards organizations, ISO, the IEC, and the ITU in Geneva, we created a collaboration on multimedia authenticity to bring all of the standards that are available and all the technical tools and raise the awareness with the policymakers so they know if they're going to legislate against deepfakes and fake content, what tools they can actually implement to make that happen.
Okay.
I think that the public are asking questions, and rightly so, about are those that want to ensure safety moving fast enough? And what is the expectation of fast enough? And how do we measure that speed? And what do we hope to achieve? And why are we doing it? There's so many questions right now that I don't think people fully understand, and it's important that we start to learn to understand the impact that that's having on people in their daily lives.
Yeah. All right, predictions for 2025. What do you think will happen? And I'll start with you, Peter Lucas, and come this way. Or what's your hope, prediction or hope around this topic for 2025?
Well, one of my hopes is really that we understand the opportunity while learning to manage the risk. And that whilst we move forward, we're not forgetting about the concerns that are raised to our awareness, and that we learn new ways to address those, and don't just address them as individuals or address them as specific businesses, but are a part of a network that collectively make important decisions to strategically address the issues that can cause harm. Harm to people, harm to places, harm to the environment, harm to the way that we might make decisions, whether those are policy decisions or decisions around lawmaking. For me, I think that my prediction for this year is there's going to be a growing interest and a growing expectation that governments start to balance their approach around rules and regulations, moderation of AI use, and not just telling the world that they're going to be using it to make decisions or, I guess, address more issues faster. So I think that as that evolves, so too will people expect them to better understand policy and balancing that with lawmaking that ensures that we do have AI for good and do no harm. Is not just a slogan, but it's part of our approach to the work that we do.
Thank you. Lauren?
I'll respond to both. My prediction, super general, I think what you'll see is continued rapid development in the quality of AI models that are out there. And so the conversation around how do we use these things for good and for benefit will continue to evolve. And that's encouraging. You know, you want to see those conversations encourage. My hope is that we use the opportunity of the continued development of the technology to take a very holistic view of security and safety, because to your point exactly, all of us have a different definition of that. it ranges in the scenarios. I want a safe computing environment. I want a safe food supply. I want a safe energy environment, all of those types of things. All of those are based on different levels of data, and we all have to lean in from a legislative perspective all the way down to us at an individual level of thinking about what that means for us personally, and then asking questions and demanding the types of systems that would allow us to feel safe and trust the systems on which we rely.
Probably three things. One we are seeing is a growth in digital identity. And digital identity is important for child online protection, because if you know that person is under a certain age, then certain content would not be appropriate and certain websites and so on would not be accessible. And we are seeing a growth in interest. Tomorrow I'll be on a panel with the Open Wallet Forum with the Minister of Justice from Switzerland and the Secretary General of ITU, where we are launching the Open Wallet Forum, which is a joint venture between ITU and the Linux Foundation to create digital wallets, where you have your EID, your driver's license, your vaccination record, and so on, in an interoperable cross-border system. I think that's key for any digital public infrastructure service or digital protection of citizens and users. The second point is 2025 is the International Year of Quantum. On first week of February in Paris, UNESCO is hosting a big seminar on quantum and its applications. And at the AI for Good, we have a Quantum for Good focus. And the reason I bring quantum in this conversation, quantum computers are very capable in going through data in a very energy efficient way compared to the farms of CPUs that we see today in the computing centers. And we're very hopeful that quantum will evolve in a very positive direction. And the third one is the interplay of AI and cybersecurity. On one hand, we have the deepfakes and the frauds and so on, but AI is also a mechanism to detect fraud very quickly. If your credit card is being used in the wrong place, AI could quickly, by the various credit card providers, detect there is fraud. So AI is an amazing tool that can help us with the cybersecurity improvement.
Thank you. Amanda, the last word is yours.
Yeah, I think the others pretty much summed it up. I think, or I hope, that there will be more benefits from using digital media, as well as more education to it, that people know what they consent with, what with their data is happening right now. So I just hope that really education comes to more people, and also that we can benefit from AI and all the growing media right now.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So there is peril, but there is promise. What's key is our awareness and our involvement and our voice. So thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panelists who've been amazing. Thank you. Thank you very much. And sincere thanks to all of you for joining here today and for your great questions and your interest in this topic. So stay safe, stay well, and may all of you enjoy digital safety in 2025. Take care.
Thank you.
There we go. Yeah.